Here is a record that doesn't look to be broken anytime soon. McEnroe is the only male player in tennis history to hold the world #1 ranking in both singles and doubles simultaneously at the same time. This goes to show how good McEnroe was, but let's take time out to figure out what makes him one of tennis greats. John was a player of great skill and finesse, with the best volleying touch in tennis history. His subtle nuances at the net, which were only a sliver of his vast arsenal of shots, stood in stark contrast to his loud outbursts between the lines, which frequently overshadowed the depth of his game. He was antagonistic, fiercely competitive, and prone to outbursts, but there was no denying his immense talent. He had the ability to defeat any competitive style he faced. He could neutralize Ivan Lendl's power and pace, match Jimmy Connor's aggressive counterpunching, and trade ground strokes with Bjorn Borg, his three main rivals. John was a marvel because of how easy he made the game look while defeating the world's best players and winning 7 major singles titles. His skill at the net earned him 9 major doubles titles and 1 major mixed doubles title. John might also have some of the greatest doubles skills in history. He and Peter Fleming created a nearly unbeatable doubles team that won 52 doubles titles, including 4 at Wimbledon and 3 at the US Open. His many achievements in doubles lead people to think that he may have been among the greatest doubles player of all time. With Mark Woodford, John won a 4th US Open's men's doubles championship in 1989. With Michael Stich, he won a 5th Wimbledon men's doubles championship in 1992, and together with Mary Carrillo, a childhood friend, he also won the mixed doubles champ match at the 1977 French Open. John was a classical net rusher. He took advantage of every opportunity to reach the net. He had unbelievable anticipation and excellent volleys at the net. Speaking of advantages, John's forehand game gave him an advantage over his opponents a lot of times. He had a very solid forehand game and a compact swing. His grip resembled a traditional Eastern grip, with his index knuckle most likely on bevel number 3. He would usually swing inside out and use his body to generate a lot of power. When playing, John would lose some acceleration because he usually took the racket back low rather than high. This was a disadvantage compared to players with a high-low swing pattern. His short, compact motion would also lend itself well to taking the ball early. This was quite essential for coming into the net, which was what John based his game on. We could say that his swing pattern always matched his game plan well enough. For his backhand game, his forehand and backhand swing patterns were strikingly similar. He effectively lifted and propelled the ball with the aid of his legs and body, a solid one-handed backhand stroke overall. John also has a nice backhand slice, which he would use to good effect on low balls to advance toward the net. He always did a good job of not over-opening the racket face when he was on his slice and volleys. As a result, his slice shots did not float too much and instead always went through the court. If you ever watched John McEnroe play, you could call him one of the best net players of all time. It is safe to assume that his mechanics at the net were very sound. He kept the racket head incredibly stable on forehand and backhand volleys while playing with a continental grip on both sides. His racket hardly moved down too much on either forehand or backhand volleys. Using a volley to serve in tennis, the half volley is crucial. It is among the trickiest shots in the game. Like no other, John excelled at this shot. He frequently succeeded in advancing difficult half-volley shots deep to the baseline, which gave him the opportunity to get closer to the net and into a better position. John also had a very peculiar service motion. Like no other player, he almost entirely turned his back to the net. One advantage of this motion is disguise. It was always difficult for opponents to predict where he would serve. In order to be an effective serve and volley player, it is crucial to vary the speed, spin, and placement of serves, which John did so well. Overall, he had a great service motion for a serve and volley player. John always had a very clear game plan. It was always just based on his strengths of serving and volleying. His goal was to always get to the net whenever possible. He never really had a powerful game from the baseline, so his options were somewhat limited in that area. We could say John's tactics made a lot of sense, especially with his technical options. In his playing days, John was incredibly fit. Most tennis champions were exceptional movers around the court, and John was certainly no exception in this aspect. When he was in his prime, he moved around the court with unbelievable speed and would reach balls that other players couldn't imagine reaching. His fitness levels were one of his weapons. His greatest strengths were his physical abilities, which included his fitness, movement, and incredible hand-eye coordination. These skills and abilities were an essential part of John's talent. John's play brought about some of tennis's most intense rivalries. If you watched him play back in the day, then you know that his rivalry with Bjorn Borg was so iconic that it was an integral part of the history of both players. Between 1978 and 81, John and Borg engaged in 14 matches that resulted in one of the greatest and most talked about rivalries in sports history. Their head-to-head was also even at 7-7. Their contrasting temperaments and playing styles served as a highlight of their on-court rivalry. John was infamous for his courtside tantrums, while the Borg was known for his cool, emotionless demeanor. As a result, their rivalry was referred to as Fire and Ice, Iceman vs Crazy Guy, the cool-headed Swede with ice in his veins against the hot-head Big Mouth. The duo's stark differences were what part of made their rivalry appealing. The left-handed McEnroe was all about disruption in his game and in his behaviour, in contrast to Borg, who preferred to stealthily stalk the baseline while swinging his two-handed backhand like a pendulum. Their rivalry turned out to be a rivalry that ended too soon, with Borg suddenly retiring after losing to John at the 1981 US Open final. After the match, Borg left the court and walked out of the stadium before the ceremonies and press conference started. He had also previously lost to John in the same season at the Wimbledon final. Before John defeated him in the 1981 final, Borg had won the Wimbledon tournament 5 times in a row from 1976 to 80 and was a 6-time French Open champion. It just tells you how good John must have been to go head-to-head with such a talented player. John would later describe Borg's retirement as a bittersweet feeling. Even though it was a tremendous moment for him to win Wimbledon, the US Open and take over the #1 ranking, he wished Borg could have kept on playing. For years he would ask Borg when he was coming back. It felt like a void that could not be filled, and it took John a couple of years to eventually accept that his rival, who made him a better player, was out of tennis. After Borg's early retirement, John felt a lack of motivation, but he found it again for his iconic 1984 season. In 1984, John McEnroe was at the pinnacle of his game and performed at a level that most players could only dream of. His 1984 campaign is mentioned whenever a male tennis player has had a successful year. His 1984 season set a record for men in the Open era in terms of statistical excellence. In 1984, John had a remarkable 82-3 record. How is that for a record? Losing just 3 games out of 85 in a year. His 96.5% winning rate still stands as the highest season-to-season winning percentage for a man in the Open era. He won 13 titles, which was a record high number for a single season in the Open era. All 3 of the major tournaments he competed in that season saw him advance to the final, winning 2. He finished the season ranked first in the world, which was not surprising. The 1984 season got off to the best possible start for John. He had the longest winning streak to start a season in the Open era, as he won his first 42 games of the season. If you exclude Bjorn Borg's 2 unofficial streaks, John's 42-match winning streak ranks 4th among men in the Open era overall. He also won 6 titles in total during his 6-month unbeaten streak. In the Open era, his streak was the longest by an American man. In 1984, John only suffered 3 losses, the fewest by a man in a single season since 1925, when Bill Tilden went 78-1. He not only had a stellar overall record, but he also dominated his biggest rivals. He defeated Ivan Lendl in 6 of their 7 matches and defeated Jimmy Connors in all 6 of their encounters, including 3 Grand Slam matches. Even on clay, which was by far his worst surface, he was still somewhat untouchable. You see, John's game was always better suited to grass and hard courts than clay, but he finally learned how to win on clay in 1984 and was playing the best tennis of his career. Ivan Lendl was able to make an inspired comeback at the French Open to win the final 3 sets and snap John's 42-match winning streak. Additionally, it resulted in the Americans' first defeat of the season. For much of the previous year, John and Lendl had traded the world #1 ranking, but even though John held the top spot since the French Open started in 1984, he was not an overwhelming favourite for the title due to his dislike of the clay. He had only played 4 times at Roland Garros, with his best performances coming in 2 quarter-final runs. Lendl, on the other hand, enjoyed playing in the mud and advanced to the final in 1981 before falling to Bjorn Borg in 5 sets. John was on track to win his first French Open championship, which would have become a remarkable run, but his infamous emotions got the better of him. The final Davis Cup match of the year was the only one he lost. After dropping the opening set 13-11 to Henrik Sundstrom, he was defeated in straight sets. What made the 1984 season so good for John McEnroe? The fact that he had just 3 defeats out of 85 games was unbelievable. He was literally untouchable during those times. He was the only men's player in the Open era to come close to achieving absolute perfection. In 1984, John came within 1 set of becoming 21-0 in a Grand Slam competition. He only competed in the other 3 tennis tournaments at the time because tennis players frequently skipped the Australian Open. He won the US Open and Wimbledon in the same year for the second time in his career. However, as evidenced by the fact that he won both finals in straight sets, he was even better than in 1981. He also made it to his only French Open final, winning the first 2 sets before Ivan Lendl bounced back to winning 5. It is his best showing at the French Open and the closest he ever came to winning a major championship outside of Wimbledon and the US Open. John had already won numerous Wimbledon and US Open championships by the end of 1984. However, his 1984 title runs were his best. He lost in the 3rd set of his first round Wimbledon match before going the entire tournament without losing another set. One of the biggest defeats in a major final brought the dominant run to an end. John defeated Jimmy Connors 6-1, 6-1, 6-2, the 3rd shortest Grand Slam final in history. And it wasn't matched until 2008 at Roland Garros when Rafael Nadal defeated Roger Federer 6-1, 6-3, 6-love. John displayed a similar level of dominance at the US Open, losing just 2 sets this time. They both happened in the semi-final matchup with Jimmy Connors. You should know John's play brought about some of tennis's most intense rivalries, especially with Jimmy Connors and Bjorn Borg. He was unstoppable in the early stages of the 1984 US Open. He defeated future 2-time US Open champions Stefan Edberg 6-1, 6-love, 6-2, who would win his first major the following year. He also defeated another rival, Ivan Lendl 6-3, 6-4, 6-1 in the US Open final, in retaliation for his heartbreaking 5-set loss to Lendl at the French Open. John McEnroe, who is regarded as one of the greatest tennis players of all time, was at the height of his game in 1984. He was unquestionably the king of tennis and was playing the best game of his career. His season also got off to the best start on the ATP Tour ever. His form was so good that he even won matches on clay courts as he advanced to his lone French Open final. However, he would never perform at that level again. He won his final Grand Slam singles championship at the 1984 US Open. Since John McEnroe's 1984 season was so successful, he actually burned out and had to take a break from tennis in 1986. He set the bar high for tennis seasons in 1984, and he still does. There hasn't been a feat as significant as his from 1984. Although some players have come close, nobody has yet surpassed it. It is one of the best seasons a man has ever had on the ATP World Tour, if not the best. It will take something extraordinary for anyone to match what McEnroe achieved in that single stellar season. Just how good was John McEnroe? Let us know what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, watch this one about his family.